makes you question, what is wealth? What does it mean? What is the purpose of community? And a really important point that I think we have to figure out how we can adopt this into our modern age, because we don't really have this, is,
hey, I go by knowledge, and I done tour the world. And the more I see, the more questions I got. But things are getting crazier. Misinformation is everywhere. So I'm on a mission to find the best minds with answers on how we fix it. It's time to drop some knowledge. Let's go.
Welcome to another episode of Dangerous Knowledge. Today, my guest is a doctor. She's got a degree in psychobiology. Is that right? Yes. Okay. And she's a board certified MD. But to me, most importantly, not only is she so incredibly educated on everything you need to know about both the mind and body, she's also got an amazing Instagram. And that's what actually drew me, was her content and the way she combines evidence-based medicine on how to make yourself into the best person you can be, but also how that integrates with us as a community and a society. I love her stuff. So my goal in this conversation is to probe deeper. I want to know more about some of the topics she talks about, and I think you're going to find them interesting as well. So Sarah, Abedi, welcome to Dangerous Knowledge.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Yes, I'm so glad. So let's start. What drove you to this? You have such a unique combination. So psychobiology, talk about that. I'm not even familiar with that.
Yeah, so it's the biology of psychology, right? So when you, for example, one of my favorite classes I've ever taken in psychobiology is how neurotransmitters work and how the pharmacology behind the antidepressive medications that we take. Right. And there's something about the power of psychology. And when we understand it and we know why we do what we do, it's not necessarily maybe how we all feel like this is free will. Everything that I do comes from a place of complete free will.
Right.
That's not the case. There's a lot of reasons why we do what we do. And a lot of them come from just, subconscious beliefs, childhood narratives, so many things. And once we can bring those things to the surface and recognize, okay, it probably had a role for survival at some point in my life, but it's not allowing me to thrive at this point. Then we bring that subconscious behavior, and then there's a little bit of space now that we can make a conscious choice to do something different. And so that's why I find, separate from the biology, just the psychology part of it, if we just understand why we are the way we are, then let's evolve to a better place.
I love that because, I don't remember where I've heard this, but it's we're not born with a manual, right? On how the human brain or the body operates. And that's what I love about what you're doing, because you touched on some really, really important things, which is these subconscious drives. I'm actually currently reading a book exactly about this topic by John Barg. I'm trying to remember the name of the book. Let me just pull it up real quick here.
Yeah.
Hang on one sec. But it's here it is. Before You Know It, which I think is a great title, and it touches on what you said, which is most people are unaware of just what's happening underneath the hood.
I know.
Right. And it's literally simple awareness. Just bringing to light the fact, number one, that there's a lot going on that we can't understand. And the biology of this because you've studied it in the brain. And so do you see this as, how is this affecting us today? Are we moving in a good direction with this or a bad direction with social media and all these things?
That's a great question. I always find social media as an external representation of the internal psyche of many people. So you can, there's been times where I've been resistant to, posting or doing anything on social media. But then I was like, if I can put maybe more of the energy that I wish, or more of a place where it can be more positive information, that would be more interesting to me. But I find that just like anything else, what we might see predominantly on social media gives us a hint as to what's going on in most people's brains, right? And so, if we are seeing just a lot of, external glorification of things, the, obsession with appearance or material, that just gives me a clue that, okay, this is where we're working, and we have a little bit more to explore, in the sense that from all of the work that I've done with people and just my personal reflections, I just don't think there is deep joy and peace that can be found like in that state,
Right.
And so I think, I don't know. What do you think?
I think so. For me, I love you. You touched on a lot of really important things.
Yeah.
One of the things I love about your content, you always tie it. So I'll give an example of what I think, why I particularly like your stuff, versus a lot of what I think is misinformation or misdirected, and it's well intentioned, and that's a lot of the problem with social media. And one of those is this sort of concept of self-love.
Yeah.
Which is very, very easy to misinterpret. And actually, if you look at the evidence, it's actually a dead end. It actually has the opposite effect. The more you focus on yourself, the less happy you become. And it's a very simple thing. And I see that so much in your content. Yeah. And I see how community driven you are.
Yeah.
And you wrote this excellent article in Psychology Today talking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which a lot of people know about, but you actually went deeper. You actually studied the original, where Maslow got that idea from the Blackfoot native tribes.
Yeah.
And you said, hey, they actually believe you're born with this. But what I love is your emphasis on community.
Well, we have for the longest time been very community based and driven. We have been in small, hunter-gatherer tribal groups, probably no greater than 150. And so 150 people. So I don't think our physiology has evolved to this hyper individualistic state that we currently live in now.
Exactly.
And we're seeing the ramifications. And I hope we can start connecting the dots that while there can be benefits of maybe in this Western way of living so individual and separate from our tribe, our family, like just even like the pressure on a nuclear family, to raise a child and bring all the resources necessary. This is very new for human beings. And so we wonder why there's, just this massive rise in depression and anxiety. And so I see those things more as maybe like a canary in the coal mine. And this is actually how
I love that analogy.
Yeah.
So continue.
Indigenous communities, whenever there would be an individual that was suffering a mental health issue, they would say, this is a moment for the community to understand what's the underlying reason. And usually they will, and it's so fascinating because many indigenous cultures think the same way, even though they live in completely different areas, that a lot of the root of mental health conditions can come from a small group of things. So either a disconnection to self, a disconnection to each other, a disconnection to nature, a disconnection to purpose. And I don't really see us asking those questions very much. I see, our current Western model of medicine, which I trained in, it has incredible benefit. It can help people tremendously, though I think it can be incomplete in some ways. And so that's where I want to take the best of Western medicine and then look at how we have lived for thousands of years before. What were those paradigms? What were those traditions? Sure. And so we saw that in the Blackfoot tribe. So what you're talking about, Maslow in the 1930s actually spent time with the Blackfoot tribe and learned from them. And that's actually where his notion of self-actualization came from. So, and
I didn't know that till I read your.
I know. Like I didn't know that. I had to find out that information. I didn't learn it in school, right? And so if people are familiar, like Maslow's, he has this like hierarchy, right? Where you have basic needs that you have to meet first. And then you will get, after you meet all those needs, it's like one to the other to the other. And then the top is self-actualization. So, the notion of like really reaching your true potential as a human and why you're here. And so you could imagine, and this is how I always thought about it, like if you can't eat, if you can't sleep, if you don't have the basic things necessary as a human, you're not going to think about, what's the purpose of life? And, but the Blackfoot tribe was like, no, that's not the case. Your birthright is self-actualization. And we as a tribe and community actually help you get there. That is our job. And so
Love
it was
that.
interesting that, even though he spent the time there with that group, he modified it in the way that he probably felt was the best for the Western culture, even though he would mention that, the rate of just like self-confidence and just ease and happiness and a sense of community and poverty, like it was minimal in that tribe. And
Right.
he also found that the most wealthy, quote unquote, wealthy and most successful people, they had this event called the giveaway, where they would come and they would talk about the how they had amassed their wealth, and then they would give it completely away to the people that needed
Wow.
it the most.
Wow.
Yeah, and so
Let's bring that back.
right, and so it really makes you question, what is wealth? What does it mean? What is the purpose of community? And a really important point that I think we have to figure out how we can adopt this into our modern age, because we don't really have this, is the reason why it works so well is that this tribe knew that they were going to be linked and connected, like basically for all their lives. So it was really in their best incentive
Right.
to care for each other, because, my success and health will be a direct representation to yours. Here, we are a melting pot, right? And so there's a lot that's going on
There's
here.
a lot. So we need to build these bridges and scale them. We need to find a way to, and I hope I'm using the right, almost industrialize community in a healthy way. And I'm using two disparate terms there, but it's so important, because this is what's getting lost. I recently read a book by Yuval Noah Harari. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he wrote his latest book, which I think is fantastic as well, Nexus. And he talks about communication and how much easier it is to communicate the wrong stuff versus the right stuff. And this is why these are harder to communicate. These are brilliant ideas, but the problem is inherent in brilliance is it's harder to come across. So we need to find ways. And this is where I'd like to add my 2 cents, where I think we've been really failing to see an incredible opportunity, which is my favorite topic, music. Right? Because here we have a medium that has not just spread across the world, but we've given tools of access to virtually anyone to be a musician now, which is incredible. I have this is literally my home studio I'm talking to you in right now. And, what once cost upwards of $50,000 is now in my home. I had Mariah Carey's here in town, and I toured with her a few years ago, and I've just connected with her backup singers, and we just made a song literally in here. You know what I mean? Now, that would have cost tens of, or at least thousands of dollars not too long ago. Now it's literally in my home, and we have an ability to now broadcast music and transmit and communicate, but it's been done in a way that's really creating a saturation that's not really meeting important needs of the community, which is things like this. It's my hypothesis that music was a much more powerful way of communicating these things thousands, tens of thousands of years ago. And somewhere in our evolution and our development of the human brain, we've learned to resonate with music in powerful ways. And I think this could be amplified. So this is my 2 cents and contribution. I've spoken with other, academics and scientists on my podcast, and they're like, no one's ever really thought of that. I'm like, well, this is my hidden motive of connecting with you guys, I guess.
No, I think you're spot on. You're spot on. And there's data and literature that show that when, like, for example, drumming, which is done in so many indigenous cultures, we do it now. It is incredibly regulating to your nervous system. And, and this is where I think when you look back at how we have lived for hundreds of thousands of years, we have naturally been able to regulate our nervous system, whether it was just being in nature, which is like, scientifically shown. If you're in nature for a period of time, your cortisol levels go down. There's things that trees actually release called phytoncides, which will
Really,
increase
I'm not
your
familiar.
immune system. Yep. It increase your natural killer cells, which are responsible for fighting cancer and infections. Like, it's amazing, this like synergy we have. And then more importantly, like music, dancing,
Yes.
there is something about that co-regulation, not only being in a group, but that rhythmic noise that's really grounding to the nervous system. And I think what I am saying, and I really want us to talk about this more, is, our nervous systems are so dysregulated just because of this hyper, like, overstimulated environment that we live in, that our bodies are not used to this. So our
Right.
nervous system was, I think, really designed for short bursts of danger, right? So if there's
Right.
something that's chasing you, okay, release all, activate your sympathetic nervous system, get all those things out, like, get away from this, threat, and then you regulate again. And so
Yes.
interestingly, like in the wild, I don't know if you've seen these videos, if an animal survives an attack or like being chased, they will like involuntarily tremor for like 5 to 10 minutes on the floor. They're basically dispelling that energy that can almost somatically get trapped in the
Wow.
body.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
not aware.
And we
Fascinating.
have that as humans.
No way.
Many times we will block that. So if you might remember moments like I remember, there have been, moments maybe of great fear, and there's a sense that I want to tremor or shake. And many times we will suppress that because of
Right.
societal concerns, like,
Sure.
oh, I'm going to look like so weak,
Weird or
but
whatever. Yeah.
no, like, this is the intelligence of your body. Being alive is traumatic, right? So we must have built-in systems on how to dispel this. And so in our day and age, like, we are so overstimulated. We are just, we are seeing usually the worst of the worst constantly on our feeds. And this is what we're talking about, like the race to the bottom of the brainstem, which is, what is that thing that can act? Because the brainstem is like the reptilian part of your brain. It is the part, it got, evolved way before your prefrontal cortex, which is your thinking mind. So that is always going to win over like rational thought. And so if there is something or someone that's convincing you, this isn't safe, us versus them, they're the enemy, like, it instills that like deep fear in you. And then you can't think logically,
and then it's put on steroids by social media.
Exactly.
And then back to what we spoke of before about unconscious drives. This is all happening underneath the hood. So the average person's not even aware of this.
I know. And if we can bring this to the surface, at least, this is what I think both of us are really fascinated, is like, I don't think we have to live this way. Like, I don't think, an amount of suffering is involved in any person's life, right? But I get the sense that there's an unnecessary amount of suffering, and the systems and the things that perpetuate them, I don't think their root is for human thriving. I think their motives and agendas might not be, the best. And so if we can bring that agency back in us, and that's where, I'm hoping that we can teach people, like, you have so much agency in your life, your health.
It takes that self, and to me, I would call that enlightenment. That's what enlightenment really is. It doesn't need this, hocus pocus. It's literally just being self-aware of these deep drives that we all have, and uncovering them together, and going, okay, I'm experiencing this. And there's a deep understanding of how the brain works. I try to use analogies to people. I'm like, how you say, well, I wasn't myself or that. And I'm like, that's actually really what's happening. Your brain, think of your brain like a corporation with different departments that do different things. Right. And I try to, I realized as a DJ, right? Like, I realized from early on the importance of communicating at where a person's level is at. And that's a big part of the issue now. And the real tragedy of what you said is, another excellent book that just came out, Sandra Matz, she's a professor in New York. She wrote a book called Mind Masters. Here's the ultimate tragedy, Sarah, is everything that's been used to do this to us could literally do this.
Yeah.
Exactly what we're saying.
Yeah.
We are actually being manipulated.
Yeah.
And she provides excellent evidence to show this.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's those same tools, instead of having this profiteering off of making us hate each other online and everything else, can be used to bring us together.
Totally.
And create these. And this is why, we have to have these conversations.
I know.
This is why this is, a passion project for me, because I know it's there.
Yeah.
There are solutions.
It's so possible.
And we need to connect people.
Yeah.
I need to make a hit song so I can raise the money and just invite you guys all. We can have a round table discussion. You know what I mean? Like some of my past guests, I think you would be fascinated by. Dave Sampson really comes to mind. Really incredible guy, very, very smart, very brilliant book. Yeah. And yet I don't think it's a bestseller. That's the crazy part. If there's a unique thing I have, it's I have this ability to find people like yourselves that are not properly appreciated for the value you're bringing. Yeah. And I think if more people knew, and that's why I think, hey, let's get musicians involved. Yeah. Right. I just released a spoken word song just yesterday on Valentine's, which, I'm just known as a club guy. So the challenge for me is I have to take my original fan base and transition that. And I've really, really started to do that, with, I was telling you about Mariah Carey. What really makes me excited about working with her singers is we took a genre, Afro house, and combined it with like old school R&B. And in the process, we had some great conversations about, the world situation and all these things. And I just think there are incredibly intelligent musicians. And if we can just team them up with people like yourself, I think magic can happen.
I think you nailed it, because we are so much just as like humans in our silos, right? Like even, in the medical profession or the academic profession. And then just, when I was doing a little bit of policy work and for mental health, like I was lucky enough to speak to so many different types of people. And I think that is where like the magic and the healing happens, because, there's something about like sharing our stories and like our respective expertise. And then, what you were talking about before about just, having conversations about these things, like these challenging things where you're just like, I don't know why this is happening. I'm finding that if we can hold that space and help each other hold that space without shame, without judgment, because I'm finding that shame is so pernicious. It keeps us in this space where we feel like, because, the thoughts that we're having are so embarrassing or dark, like it just, we don't share them. But they are so universal. And this is maybe what I'm trying to say, from being the person on the other side, listening to the human experience of many people, that shame is one of the biggest things that like keeps us from like connecting like deeply in this way. And so I find that not always, but the judgment, or when we feel really triggered by someone, not always, but many times it's usually telling us there's something about us that we don't want to see,
I love that. I love that.
And so again, this is like, if we can shift from more of that reactive place to like curious, like, oh, why did that trigger me so much? Why am I so angry?
Yes.
What is going on here? And then the root of it can be many different things. Like it can be limiting beliefs from childhood. It can be maladaptive core beliefs, like the most common ones. I am not lovable. I am not worthy. Like it is wild how many
I'm a huge
adults,
believer.
have that, like feel that deeply. And that dictates and guides how they live in their relationship. So like, let's get as curious as possible and like be able to hold that space for each other. That's what we got to do.
I couldn't agree more. If I can add to that, I've had a unique life experience in that, I come from a different culture. I come from a different country. I've lived in several countries, so I've understood people culturally differently from myself. And I've built bridges, through even cross sections of sub-society, subcultures here in America by music, right? Like I toured with Ice Cube this year, but I also do country bars in the Midwest and the South.
I
Right?
love it.
There's not too many people that do that, right?
Yeah.
And that's where I've learned to appreciate different people. And it goes back to that book I told you by Jonathan Haidt, Righteous Mind, really helped me understand other frameworks of thinking. And I think, one of the key things that I think people falsely do is they love to call the other group stupid.
Yeah.
And what it really is, and this was the hardest thing for me to understand, is intelligence is far more complex. And living tribally and living as frictionless as we can in a society is why we have these different traits. And just as importantly, context matters and culturalization matter a lot. So like one of my guests was Luke Burgess, who wrote this incredible book, Wanting. And that is the premise that humans are the only animal not born knowing what they want, right? So that has enormous implications. That's worthy of writing a whole book. And he wrote this fascinating book about this. And Girard was the sort of thought leader on this notion of mimesis, how humans essentially imitate each other. And then when you combine that with the whole need within a tribe of status, we need a way of defining who we are and saying, where do I fit in this sort of hierarchy? How do I get to, how do we as a society get to decide who gets what? And this comes back way back to, the times on the plane where we'd, the alpha males, for lack of a better word, would go and hunt the, zebra or whatever it was. And then they'd bring it to the village. Well, who gets the first dibs? Who gets the second dibs? Who gets the third? And I think these are deeply embedded in our psyche to this day. And that's what social media exploits essentially by taking our need for this attention as a sense of status. Where do we fit in this hierarchy? Right. And so these are deep, deep drives within us that, again, people aren't aware of. And once they become aware, and once we realize, hey, we're just imitating what we see, and then we're trying to get it to fit a wide variety of contexts, which makes us very vulnerable to the wrong messages, depending on the way we're built, right? So, that's what I love to point out to people. Like,
there's something, like, as you're saying this immediately popped into my mind. And this is why I love when we can look at different contexts and different cultures and how they have maybe conceptualized it and the wisdom that they have. And again, not like we're saying, okay, let's incorporate that, but like, what can we learn from that if we feel that there is a tension and something is off with how we're living now, which I don't think there's one person that would say like something's off. Like it doesn't feel, people are not doing well. I think there's a lot of room
for general malaise.
Yeah. And so, interestingly, and this is where I'm open because, some people will say, hierarchy is 100% necessary. You cannot exist without it. And we have seen it in nature where I can also say we can see in other aspects of nature where there isn't necessarily hierarchy. But what came to mind as you were talking was actually in the Lakota tradition, Native Americans, that there's no hierarchy of animals. So they actually view all beings, so humans, animals, plants, even the elements, as interconnected relatives rather than entities to be dominated.
Interconnected relatives.
Yeah. And so this belief is actually deeply rooted in their spiritual philosophy, which actually sees life as a sacred web. So each being has a role.
You got me so interested in diving deeper into indigenous.
They have so much wisdom, and it's been such a privilege for me to just, I have found that, through my own work, my own exploration, I've come to this place that we are so interconnected, everything, like us as humans, us, to nature, to everything around us. And when we don't acknowledge that, even the simple thing of like, our mind to our gut, like the microbiome of our gut, before we actually thought, like in medicine, most of like Western medicine is predicated on this notion of mechanistic reductionism, which basically means like you can be brought to the sum of your parts. And so that's actually why we have, different specialties for different like organs, right? Whereas I think we also need to incorporate more systems thinking. Like we are very
Yes.
interconnected, complex
Yes.
ecosystems. Like,
Yes.
and
I
so
completely agree.
this reminded me of this, where, this notion of the sacred web, that each has its own role and each has its own wisdom. And so it's not a resource to be controlled, but there's a balance. There's
There's a
no
balance and an
one's
interconnection.
superior. Yeah. Yeah. And so,
I couldn't agree more.
yeah.
It's interesting. I grew up with ADHD, and it's all the rage to talk about how to help it and all this. And I realized I need to just learn how to harness it.
Yeah.
And I think one of my unique skill sets is that it's my ability to take almost completely unrelated subjects and combining them.
Yep.
And I think and that is a weakness of science, is its tendency to specialize.
Yeah.
Right. And I think, right, we almost need a science of interconnectedness.
Yeah.
Scientists who specialize in integrating information from specialized areas.
Yeah.
And I think more and more, once we start doing that and recognizing exactly what you say, and there's ancient wisdom in that. There's ancient wisdom in so many cultures.
Mm-hmm.
I spent a significant amount of time in Norway. What a fascinating people they are.
Yeah.
Right? They have very simple, they're the richest country in the world by citizen. No, and through their own culture, they don't like to talk about that.
Wow.
That's why you don't hear about it.
Yeah.
They have a sovereign wealth fund that is literally worth $250,000 per person in the country. Isn't that incredible? And you know what they use that sovereign wealth fund to do? Invest in, well, yeah, but they actually divest companies around the world that are doing bad things too. Isn't that incredible? Wow. And they don't even talk about it. They just, yeah. So there is good in the world. We need, sorry, go ahead.
No. When you were talking about ADHD, we're just talking about Indigenous wisdom right now. It reminds me that many, for example, the Maori of New Zealand, they don't see like ADHD as a disorder.
Right.
They see it as you have focus on many things. I think that's actually what the word translates.
Yes.
He who focuses on many things. I don't know if that's something like that. And how essential that type of person is in society, especially if we have been, more hunter-gatherers, like tribal, like you almost need that person that can focus on many things. And so what is the environment that we actually need to be raising them in? And what are the systems and environments right now where we, for example, have children sit for most of the day inside?
Right.
This is new for most of humanity. We have been outside for most of our life. And so, what would those look like? And then really reverse engineering, or maybe returning back to our roots to say, is this pathology? Because I think that's what you were mentioning. Where are we a little too quick to pathologize and say, you have this disease, you have this disorder,
or even trauma? Right?
Yeah,
all the rage. But you know what? I've literally talked to kids directly or young people directly from war, and they actually act quite differently than people here who claim trauma. So that, we have, and so my point in saying that is context matters, culturalization matters. All these things are just so critical. And it's by having these conversations and putting them on social media. That's, the biggest value of this is when we clip these out and put them all over social media versus the full episode. So, we're getting there, right? But we have an enormous tidal wave to overcome. So, So, in your real life practice, you're a keynote speaker, right?
Mm-hmm.
You've done, so how can we translate what you're doing more to the public? Is it social media? Are there any unique ways to do this that aren't being done? Because I'm guessing, behind the scenes, you're doing enormous amount of work, right?
That's a great question. Yeah, I'm finding, and I think you touched on it, is how can we this is like my mission, and I want to find the others that can help me, is how can we, and maybe because I know exactly what I believe that we need to do more of. And maybe I'll ask you, like, what do you think might be the best way to translate it? But as we were touching on it earlier, how do we help people recognize the infinite potential that exists in them, the infinite power that they have? And it's not just in the psychology realm. Like there's this really interesting way of thinking. It's called the exposome, where it's not just, very linear, like you go to the doctor, okay, what are your symptoms? And then you do some labs and, okay, maybe this is a pill. The exposome actually looks at so many different aspects of your health. So it's going to look at how are you eating? How are you sleeping? What are your relationships? What's your environmental exposure?
Right.
What is the detail? And I still think there's even more room, like what are, maybe adverse childhood experiences that can later affect you as an adult, which is fascinating. We should talk about that if we have it.
Yeah.
And then what many of those things, that human being has so much agency to change. There's a lot of things we can't change, the things that we're exposed to, but there are a lot of relationships. There are a lot of, people, work, foods, how we live, where we decide to live. And when we're like, no, like I have to live this way, question that. Like, why do you have to live this way? Like, and that's where I think the questioning and the curiosity comes from is, what are these stories that we've told ourselves of this is how it needs to be. This is who we need to be. Like, if that's you, great. And if you feel like you are in true alignment, beautiful. But I find that the best gift we can not only give ourselves, but the world is helping people recognize what that alignment is for them. So I think for you, when I see
I just want to interject I want to interject here because there are people doing this.
Yeah.
The problem is they don't have a degree and they're not an MD like you. And there's this anti-science rhetoric out there.
Yeah.
Right. So we need to find a way to it's people like you, because you understand the need for a rigorous procedural tests, experiments, and being surrounded by other people who are engaged in this versus the not mostly, but at least partially grifting by most of these people. Mm-hmm. And again, they're being aided and abetted by social media, right? So we need to we need to clarify. So that starts with giving the understanding to the average person.
Right.
Why this process is important, why this process is necessary. And again, I have ideas. We need to we need to, partner you with an artist, for example. We need to even coach you into understanding how rhetoric works. Yeah. Right. And then saying, hey, you need to apply this. Like I would say just off, you're so charismatic in real life and you're probably the kind of person that likes to be private, and I can respect that totally. Cause I wish I could be more private. The problem is these grifters are not.
Yeah.
They love showing themselves on camera. They love hearing their own voice, and they love spewing half truths.
Yeah.
And
I think there's this word is just coming to me is discernment, right? Like I think there's a level of, I think it's intuition, but also more discernment, where I think we have so much of I'm just going to say it, and then we have to probably figure out like, how do we help people get there? But, how can we use our internal compass to just know if something feels right or off, like, and this is where, like, even for me, like my personal journey, I had chronic gut and skin issues for the longest time. And I had, tried everything in Western medicine to help that. I had it probably for like a decade and a half. And I'd gone to amazing specialist after amazing specialist. And they all said, you're just going to have to live with this. Like there's nothing, there's, no thing. These things can help, stop it or temper it. But I just had this sense, this feeling, intuition, discernment, something where I was just like, I don't think that's right, and I'm glad that I listened to that, because when I pulled on that thread and I really had to examine all aspects of my life. So like how, for example, my work was creating just, it was really not in alignment for me. How I was eating, how I was sleeping, the relationships I was in. I had done some like advanced gut testing, and I had massive amounts of inflammation in my body. And I think, how can we help increase that intuition slash discernment for people to know like this resonates with me or this doesn't? And then if it does or doesn't, again, it's always that curiosity, like how can we learn, but also hold our beliefs somewhat with loose hands, just in the sense of, I remember my thinking was so black and white that if this is not in the literature, it doesn't exist. Like this is woo woo. I don't believe in it, but I'm finding where is the balance. And I think this is what you're talking about is, evidence-based research is incredibly powerful, and it has been game changing. And when we look, for example, like, which is one of the things that I really use to help do my gut healing were Ayurvedic principles, right? And the different types of medicines that Ayurveda uses, which interestingly, there's a book about how most of the things they use now we're learning that they have incredible gut healing properties. And a lot of, even like Hippocrates, for example, would say all disease starts in the gut. We're learning that now, how powerful.
That's actually true.
Yeah, it's true. And so they were doing something that maybe they knew or didn't know.
We just don't understand. And that's a weakness of science.
Yeah. And so
if we can't measure it, it doesn't exist, which is not true. Maybe we just don't have the tools to measure it.
And so that is where I think we just have to be a little bit more open-minded, that when there's that evidence-based research, phenomenal. But when we look, for example, like, meditation for the longest time was deemed this like woo-woo, don't believe it until we started studying it. But anecdotally, there were thousands of years of research. It had worked for people for thousands of years. That also needs to hold some weight here. And so how can we, again, I don't know exactly what the answer is, but how can we just remain curious to say, do I have the complete picture? Change my mind. Like help.
I think it's exactly what you said. It's literally the foundation is evidence-based with an open mind saying, hey, you know what? There's a lot of things we don't understand.
We don't know.
But not only that, we don't know how to understand.
Yeah.
And, a lot of times the science is catching up with the wisdom. And even that's a little fuzzy.
Yeah.
But that's okay. As long as the foundation is science and evidence-based, as long as we approach it like that first, and then we say, all right, there might be something to this. There might be something to that. And I would say even societally, that's also the case. I think we've lost very important values in society that we thought were regressive. And now we're learning that maybe there's secondary and tertiary effects that we just didn't understand or we didn't expect. Right? We're seeing, I would say, we're seeing a deregularization, a deregulate. I don't even know if there's a word, but basically,
I know what you mean.
Regulations started with economics, but I think societally and politically as well. This started in the late 60s, right? This is how deep the rabbit hole I go, is to try to understand this. It was an economist. So my education is economics. So that's why, I was supposed to be a banker, go figure. But so it started with this guy, Milton Friedman, right? I don't know. Are you familiar with Milton Friedman? So he's a guy, for anyone that doesn't know, he had this idea that the less regulations on business and economics, the better. And, that then morphed into libertarianism, which is basically I don't like government. Government's bad. The less government, the better. And we've started doing that. But what has happened in the process? We're all collectively worse off, except for a very small percentage of people. And we're seeing that in all aspects of society, whether it's business, relationships, everything politically. The spoils are increasingly going to fewer and fewer people.
Yeah.
And I think the foundation of that is these regulations and societally as well. There's less people going to church now. And it's thought, God is archaic, these whole ideas. And it's very easy to debunk the Bible. But now we're seeing the consequences, because instead of worshiping God, people are worshiping Kim Kardashian, right? So is that, I'm not necessarily in favor of praising God, but I think the alternative has shown to be worse.
Yeah.
So
I have so much to say.
yeah, me too.
Yeah.
But, I don't know how much time you got. So
Yeah. Well, I think, I want
we should definitely do a different, like this. I feel like we could talk for hours. It's
hours. Yeah. Do we have more time, or is this done?
I'm good. So if you want to keep going.
Yeah. Well, so what you were saying, I mean, I think, I want to come back to the economy part, or maybe I'll address that. I think this is why it's important to me, at least, to like get curious about, the systems, and why is the system the way that it is, and who is it benefiting, and is the bottom line, is it benefiting the largest number of people for human thriving? And if it isn't, because we as humans have made it, we as humans can make something else. And so this is why, like, as much as people are like, oh no, this is how it's always been. No,
Exactly.
And it always reminds me of that quote, it's always impossible until it's done. Like, we have to question, why was this created? Who was this created by? And then make iterations and improvements. That's like the beauty of humanity. And so there's something about these economic models, and I see brilliant people questioning economists, how do we have the end goal usually being endless GDP growth in a world with finite resources? And how can instead, maybe like, the Lakota tribe, or, just that notion of more of a circular economy, something where we acknowledge.
Well, there is a woman who came up with that. I do believe
she's amazing.
have these solutions. I was, just to give you an idea, my graduating class, there was only one girl in the whole economic graduating class. And I was the lone, everyone saw me as the party guy, because even back then I used to put on events and stuff. And I had these crazy ideas that, maybe exactly what you're saying, maybe GDP is not the best way to measure things. Maybe we should be on human thriving. And, you wouldn't believe how many guys I went to school with back then. I'll never forget, getting a long email from one of them saying, hey man, just so you know, we all follow you on social media, and it's crazy what you've done with this DJing thing. We thought you were an idiot back then. and here you are. And I was like, I just want you to know, I cashed out. I quit my corporate banking job. I'm moving back to my hometown. And a lot of it was inspired because of just seeing what we've done. Right. Which is pretty cool, right? Like,
incredible. Yeah.
Yeah. So and really what my thought is, we need to amplify this.
Yes.
We need to find, because we're outgunned. Yeah. Like, I've read the books. Like, if I tell you how many books I can, like, right in my studio, I've got about 50 books on each side. And then that's literally probably 10% because most of them are in my Kindle. Mm-hmm. And there's so many brilliant minds out there. And so that's my mission. That's my project.
You're doing it.
So even after this, like, we'll talk. And I love the idea of, I think my next one, I'd love to have a round table.
Yeah.
And invite multiple people in.
Yeah.
And my guest tomorrow is an excellent health and wellness nutritionist. She's a certified dietitian. Mm-hmm. And, I could give you a list of recommendations to follow. And then what I would tell all these people in these circles, we need to amplify each other. That's the first step. And that's the easiest thing, is to literally be proactive on social media with each other.
Yeah. Right? No, that's
you need to like my stuff. I need to like your stuff.
Yeah.
And by amplifying each other, it creates these networks that draw in others. Yes. So like-minded people on your page will see that. Yeah. Like-minded people on my page will see you.
I like
in
that.
a far more effective way. Yeah. So that's going to be my going forward, I think, because I think when these conversations finish, that's the problem, is you go off to do your life, I go off to do mine.
No, totally.
We got to keep going. This actually went more, I mean, you're just full of so much insight that I don't think is actually like, for a guy like me that already knows and is aligned with you, this is great. I'm looking at your page, right? But it's so like, it's almost overwhelming with text, right? And I think you have such a gentle look and approach. I think you could be so much more effective. I'm being honest. Just coming on a camera like this.
And just saying them. Yeah.
And just saying, hey guys, I use evidence-based science to help promote wellness, I don't know if nutrition would be, but something, and bringing community, and then even challenging people as well.
Yeah.
I have a good friend who's got a massive social media following.
Yeah.
I did a podcast, Dr. Ben Rain.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you've seen him online, but he loves to debunk in very effective ways some bad information, right?
Yeah.
So,
you're inspiring me. Okay.
Well, we got to talk more.
Yeah. But the one thing I wanted to say before, because this is what I wanted to, just so fascinating. We were talking about like religion and people moving away from that. I'm finding this, at least just in my environment and some of the work that I'm doing, because I do research in psychedelic medicine.
Right.
And that was some of the policy work I was doing, is to try to get more funding to understand it. Again, something that has been practiced in indigenous cultures for thousands of years. And we're starting to reemerge some of those traditions and then new traditions that we are making. And what I'm finding, so there was this really interesting study out of NYU where they had given psychedelic medicine to like spiritual leaders. And it was interesting how it changed their perspective on religion. Yes. It actually made it, it strengthened the best parts of it for them. Like it reinvigorated like the deep, true meaning of why they were drawn to that in the first place. And then also we're finding, there's a lot of work with veterans, like Navy SEALs. There's, I think, a 60 Minutes episode on it. A friend of mine like spearheading this work really well, where, veterans from, this country will go down to Mexico or to Peru and get these medicines and have, no spiritual, no type of like spiritual or any kind of experience other than just like the linear world that they had lived in, but found so much healing in that realm that they feel like that was a big part of why. Now, some people will question, do you even need that psychedelic experience? So I'm not getting into that part. But the biggest take back they get from sometimes like the spiritual aspect, and this is what I feel too, is that reconnection, because it never goes away, of how deeply interconnected we are. And then when they go back to their traumas, that other view of seeing it instead of the first world, like, my parent did this to me, they have this vantage point that they never had where they saw what happened intergenerationally there. So what happened to mom that did that to me? And then what happened to grandma who perpetuated that?
And then some distant ancestors that you don't even know. Right.
Yeah.
And so here's a crazy thought that just came to me. You are the modern day shaman. You should be, but you should be, right? Because here's the problem, and take it from a guy that does music and festivals. And I've been drug free my entire life.
Yeah.
I am staunchly opposed to the way drugs, this is a deep, dirty, dark secret about festivals and all these things, which is part of the reason I'm very reluctant to get involved. But on the other hand, yes, there is very, very powerful and positive effects. I myself have tried MDMA, and I've been very blessed that I just don't have an addictive nature. I just don't. I don't understand it, to be honest. I don't understand if something's bad for me, why anybody would continue. Even alcohol, I barely drink. Even if I do, it's like my brain has never said I need more. It's literally, that's enough. I'm good. But on that note, why not create these music and festival experiences where we have people like yourself that have studied it, that know the good, the bad, and the ugly, and are there to regulate and keep it safe. And this is what these shamans did back then, right? So I'm guessing here, but they had the secret on how to make things like ayahuasca, for example, but they also understood the dangerous other side of this. So
powerful in both ways. Yeah.
Right. So if we just let everybody use this stuff, there's bad that could likely lead to a bad path. Whereas there's some healing to it too. If we combine it with music in the right way, we combine it with this and movement and connection and positivity, and we remove the toxic elements. And that's why we need the shamans, the modern day shamans, right? That are aware of all these dangers and negatives along with the positives. So, that's a whole idea that just, from what you're saying, that to me is a whole new role for someone like yourself.
Yeah.
Right. Because that's what we need. And we need to glorify and amplify that instead of, again, the Kim Kardashians who, very much like to be seen as these modern shamans in some ways, except they're profiting in the most unhealthy ways with it.
I think whenever there is someone like, the gurus or any shaman that says like, the answer is found like in me or my teaching,
right.
Like the person that is trying to like help you remember, for lack of a better word, your light, or like it is never about anyone other than that person that is trying to, remove the roadblocks of you almost getting in the way of your own acknowledgement of how sacred you are, or whatever that is. And and so that is like one of the best metrics. And a lot of times I can almost you can just feel it now, but before knowing how to like tap into like, how do I feel when I'm around that person? Yeah. When someone is trying to convince you that the answers are like found outside of you through this thing or that, be curious,
And some of these people are very good at portraying themselves. And again, the grift is they will have truth.
Yeah.
And I think the mistake when debunkers come out is they just dismiss these types of people.
Yeah.
And I think the important thing to recognize is, number one, people have a need.
Yeah.
Number two, there's truth to what they're saying.
Yeah.
They're not saying entire drivel, otherwise nobody would listen to them.
Right.
You know what I mean? So my favorite health debunker online is Dr. Jessica Nurick, I think. Mm-hmm. She's amazing because you know what? She acknowledges. That's what I love about her.
Yeah.
She acknowledges, hey, this is this and this is great, but this is how to do it better.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Follow her. She's brilliant. She's great.
There's something about like the cancel culture where that's not it yet. I understand where the intention came from to maybe hold someone accountable. But I think more, you're right. It's like, instead of seeing things as black and white, which, interestingly, the other cultures, like for example, like Taoism, like they don't see anything as good or bad. They just see it as is, and so it's different than like, oh, that's a bad person or that's a good person. No, we are everything. Like we are everything. We have darkness, we have light. And usually when we're so critical of someone else's darkness is because maybe we have a little bit of that inside and we don't want to acknowledge it. Right. So again, just like being curious that like it's 1,000 shades of gray, and so let's stop being so, it feels again, polarizing.
So dogmatic.
Yeah, it's dogmatic and it's just not how being a human is. A human is a spectrum of things.
There's so many nuggets. A human is you need to put you need to put this.
Okay, you can help me.
So I'm coaching you online, okay? Because I'm seeing stuff here.
Yeah.
And I love them.
Yeah.
But, oh boy, how do I word this? You got to simplify.
Yes.
And I love that. Because you know what you just said there? Yeah. Something that sounds so guru-esque. A human is a spectrum. But there's actual science to that.
But we are.
That's the beauty. That's the beauty of what you just said.
Yeah.
It's a human is a spectrum. Yeah. Sounds beautiful. Sounds a little profound and woo-woo. But it's actually accurate.
But I just find it very true. Yeah. And the less we like demonize ourselves, right, for being bad, or it's like, no, like get curious. Like that's shadow. Like that's your shadow work, and the more we can help each other see the darkest shadows in ourselves and then work through it. That's what this is about, not like this judgment and shame. And so, when people can do that, point it out. Don't put more of that energy out. Just say, okay, I see this and maybe let's try this. If it resonates, great. If it doesn't, throw it away, like use your discernment here. That's what we need to see more of.
Yeah. And community. So, one thing I love is how you very accurately, and this is, what we talked about, I believe before the camera started, which was, these wellness experts always talk about self-love.
Yeah.
And, and I know from reading actual scientists that's actually counterproductive to think like this because it's essentially selfish. And we as humans are designed to be community-based, and so what are your thoughts when we do social media or we engage, how do people optimize themselves? So instead of self-love, what should we do to actually build that true inner peace and satisfaction? And, it's okay to simplify a little here.
Yeah. No, that's a really good question. I think maybe the way I would interpret it is when you are looking for like external validation, to bring peace or acknowledge that desire or need in you for love, acceptance, but like external validation on things that won't work. So like material things, or
Right.
I don't know what it is. There is a level of, I think, internal validation that only, like, how do I word this?
Satisfied is fulfilled.
You can only be like, if you, like, for example, like if you do not know yourself, the world will tell you, or like there will be other people's energies that are trying maybe to share their perspective or their vision. So there needs to be this like internal knowing and grounding, but like we are not isolated beings. Like we have to be in community. But I think the second part to this is like it needs to be like an intentional, aware community. Like I'm very cautious to say, when you are sharing and when you are healing, and when you need that companionship, or whether it's like an actual therapist, or it needs to be someone deeply trusted, right? Someone that has done their work or is beginning to do their work, or can hold that space for you without shame or judgment. And so
Right.
While I think there is an element, and maybe this is what they're trying to say, is so much of the answers are inside of you, not elsewhere. But none of us live in silos,
Sure.
so I think it's a little bit of both. Well, yeah, give me your interpretation.
I've realized for me it's community.
Yeah.
And it can be, and the best way I can call it is fulfillment. It's not happiness. I wouldn't even describe it as happiness.
Yeah.
I learned about this. I used to DJ on cruise ships.
Yeah.
And they're literally a microcosm of the world.
Yeah.
The first thing, there's about, over 1,000 workers on a cruise ship. And they're coming from all over the world. So here I was, 25 years old, and I'm the DJ. So I think I'm a big deal, which I kind of am. There's so there's a hierarchy. There's the officers and the captain. Yeah. Then there's the entertainers. Then there's like the sort of clerks. And then there's the staff, which is the majority, or the crew. And they do the stuff nobody else wants to do. They live below deck. They're literally not allowed above that unless it's job related. Like their life in a nutshell sucks. And here I was 25 years old. They got to call me sir. It was so bizarre to me. I was like, this happy-go-lucky dude, wore my hat backwards, and these grown men. And they're, working to help their families back home. So they'd spend 9 months or 10 months out of the year on this cruise ship to send money to their wife and kids, or their husband and kids that they barely get to see.
Wow.
And yet, guess who are the unhappiest people on this ship? The entertainers.
Wow.
They were so unhappy all the time. I just couldn't be around them. And that gave me the first clue that maybe this is all a culturalized lie.
Yeah.
And I saw that when I'm surrounded, I couldn't eat with them. There's a point where, I'd go, we had our own dining room with just me and the entertainers, and all that they would talk about the most petty things and how unhappy and how their life sucked. And I'm thinking, this person's making thousands of dollars to perform in front of passengers, and they're unhappy. And just down the hall is the crew mess, where there's some guy from India who literally works, and I'm not joking, 7 days a week, 10 hours a day, and doesn't complain. And I was like, there's something to this, I get, part of the thing that happens to me is I get so many people asking me to donate money. It's very taxing, and it's hard. And a lot of times it gets to me, right? Because I know I can't help everyone, and I have to say no sometimes, but there's still an incredible fulfillment in what I'm doing. I know that. And even if I'm not happy, I realize these people are coming to me because they really look up to me, or I've helped them in the past, or whatever. And I don't advertise it. I don't believe in that. Recently I'm helping a refugee go home, and he needs to build his home. So I share a story, of course, and everything else, but I try to keep that stuff private, because I realize that the true fulfillment comes from being community oriented, putting other people first. And it was doing that helped me sort of feel a deeper sense of purpose. And, I'm in a very toxic business. Like, I'm around terrible people. Let me just say that. And there's also amazing people. Let me be clear. There's also incredible people. But as a way of truly being fulfilled, it's being this community oriented. It's thinking of others.
There's something about being in service, that I have never seen anyone, not get to that realization that the ultimate way of being is to be in service. But while recognizing that, you are meeting your needs, like your basic, because there's some people that will
there is a reciprocality to it. So it's not getting used in the process.
Yeah.
Right. So there's some people that this brain circuitry is kind of confused, and they end up being in an exploitive situation.
Yeah.
Right. So
it's
again, but when we have these conversations and we talk about it, and we have these, I don't know what to call them, modern day shamans, where, experts, glorified academics, I think what we need to transition to. And when we do that, these people provide the real answers, as opposed to, I can go on my news feed on Instagram.
No, I know.
And they know exactly. They know a guy says half truths. It's going to trigger me. I'm going to be like, and then I'm going to delete. I'm not going to say it, but I should, but I'm not, that's what we need.
Yeah. There are these universal truths, I think, that we are seeing not only echoed, in past cultures, but they're beautifully reemerging right now.
Yes.
And so, how can we,
And it's having these conversations. We're getting there. We got to do this again.
We're going to do it again.
I really,
I
really feel like we touched on so much.
We have so much more to touch on.
You can see, like, I'm like a little kid, man. I'm just like, well, I get to every time I do these podcasts. I'm like, I love it. You know what I mean? I just genuinely
it's resonating deeply with the human, with like, it's like, it's such a beautiful creative expression. Not only just have a conversation for no other reason than to have a conversation,
right?
And it's just like, it's beautiful.
So let's do this again. Okay. You're amazing.
So are you.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Sarah Abedi.
Thank you.
I highly recommend you Google her, look up her articles in Psychology Today. Go follow her on Instagram. She's got tremendous. I'm so picky about who I like to follow, and I've literally gone through probably most your stuff. And I don't think there's even a single thing that I was even ho-hum. You are so bang on, and I love this. And you don't use pop psychology terms incorrectly. That's a thing I want to talk to you about next conversation, because I think that's happening right now. And I think it's part of the problem, and we can get deeper into what's actually going on. Even experts, or so-called accredited experts, I think the most successful ones are because they're grifting as well. And that's the next challenge. And how does a DJ get to say that to someone with a PhD?
I love it.
Right? Right. So I have to. That's my cheat code. I know experts and actual educated, with PhDs. I can go to you. So I might be bugging you. I'm just warning you. And be like, hey, this PhD wrote this. Is this accurate? Because I don't think it is.
And this is where you get curious, right? You get curious and you check to see if this is something that could resonate or make your life better. Or, it just, This expert field, I think it might evolve a little bit.
Yes. Thank you so much, man. You've been such a treasure trove.
Thank you.
Amazing. We're going to put this out ASAP.
Okay.